Mabuhay! Magandang umaga po sa iyong lahat. Welcome to TerpTalks Season 2, Episode 2, brought to you by the Philippine National Association of Sign Language Interpreters. Ako po si Bayani, broadcasting live from the city of Seven Lakes, San Pablo City. And now I'd like to introduce my lovely co-host, Miss Ishat from Cebu City. Mabuhay, Ishat!
Hello, good morning!
Hello, good morning, Ishat. Kumusta ka, te?
Hi, Sir Bai. I'm doing good.
How's life?
Okay lang, kinakabahan pa rin.
Hanggang ngayon, last week, kinakabahan?
Oo, ayan.
Para breakdown yung from Cebu City.
Yes.
So, if you were to take me somewhere in Cebu, where would you take me? Where would be the place to be?
I would take you to our barangay. It's in Guadalupe because we have the best mangoes and we're known for the mangoes that we export to the world.
I love mangoes, and I know for a fact that our special guest today is in love with mangoes as well. So, mamaya natin i-introduce siya. Let's talk about what we learned last week. Do you remember we talked about allyship? So, what is the pinaka-impact sa iyo? What did you learn about last week?
Like what I said last week, when I went into the episode, akala ko allyship would be more of paano ako makakapag-build ng relationships with my fellow interpreters, how to strengthen my relationship with the deaf community. Pero yung core talaga ng allyship actually is yung sa sarili mo, your self-awareness mo, and if you have a good grasp of what you want to do and what you want to accomplish with these communities, and then I think yun yung makakapag-achieve ng mga goals mo through allyship with the deaf and your fellow interpreters. So,
wow, very good.
yan.
Alam mo yung
reflection paper.
So, did you know what I learned about last week?
Sige po. What was your takeaway din from last week? From last
Ang oily
episode?
pala ng face ko. I need to put powder mo kasi napaka-shiny. But oo, tama ka. I learned about to be a well-rounded interpreter, you have to be self-aware. You have to focus on your inward, yung goals mo, yung values mo, to make sure that magkatugma, they're aligned with the goals of the community and the goals of the deaf as well. So, today, we have a very interesting topic. It's called Power Dynamics.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's all the bad things that interpreters do. Yes, we will go there. Pero mamaya po yan. First of all, I'd like to check with the audience. Hello, audience. Hello, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. How are you?
Hi everybody. We have a comment from Miss Lenny Fabilitante. I'm deaf and I live in Cuenca, Batangas. Hello to Batangas from San Pablo and Cebu.
Hello. We
And then
have
we have
also
another
from,
one. It's
yes,
Miss
go
Giselle
ahead.
Josh Imperial Sanchez. Hello, I'm deaf. I watch here. I'm from Bicol. Hi! Oh my
Wow, from
God, ang
Bicol,
dami-daming nanonood
the
all
city of
over.
Sile.
Earl. So for May Flores, Earl Jason Austria, I think tinatag niya yung mga friends niya to also watch the episode. So thank you very much. Thank you for sharing the link. So we hope more of you will be joining us for this episode. Hello,
Hey,
host. Well, hi, Sir Mike. Sir Mike was our
last
guest
week.
last week
Yeah,
about
hi there.
allyship. Hi, Sir. Hi, Sir Mike.
Yes.
Thanks for joining
So
us.
please feel free to make comments, ask questions, because we want to make Terp Talks as interactive as possible. We want to make sure that we incorporate what you really want to know about the interpreting field, the profession, anything goes. So let's introduce our Pinasli president and also the one who organized this whole Terp Talks, Miss Nati Natividad. Miss Nati, mabuhay.
Hi, mabuhay from Iloilo, but now in Manila. So it's dinagyang. So just imagine drum rolls, and beat of the drums from where I came from. So dinagyang coming soon in January. I don't know what will happen with this pandemic. Probably a virtual dinagyang. Maayong aga sa tanan nga taga Iloilo kag ang mga Ilonggo speaking interpreters. Welcome to season 2, episode 2. Wow, season 2 na tayo, guys. And
Mhm.
episode 2 and more. Diba? We're leveling up this season 2, as you've observed, as you have seen first episode last week. We had our guests from the US. Well, they're not very far. They're very near kasi nga with technology, internet, with online streaming and Zoom and StreamYard, our world is getting smaller and smaller, and you can hear my cats crying.
Mhm.
Don't worry, work from home struggle is real. So yeah, it's good to have our friends from the other side of the world join us and help us, educate us, make us more. Our world is getting bigger.
Mhm.
Bayan, Bisaya, man good, uy.
Mhm.
Ilonggo, Bisaya, nag-mix-mix na, mauna. Yeah. So Lester, bala ka na Lester mag-interpret dyan. Basta I said, well, anyway, so yeah. And for this episode 2, again, it's our guest is from the other side of the world, and he's been very generous with his time and his knowledge. And he was with us in Quarant Terps also, so our host will introduce them later on. Yeah, and in the following weeks, there's gonna be more surprises. I'm looking forward to the third episode. A surprise lang muna, guys. Surprise, especially from our folks from Visayas and Mindanao. It's gonna be a different format. You'll see more new faces on screen, right, Ishad? So yeah,
Yay.
we're brewing something new, something that every interpreter from not just in the Imperial Manila but also from the sides in Mindanao can look forward to. Yeah,
Yeah.
surprise na lang po next week para you will
Mhm.
tune in and you will
Mhm.
tune in for our episode 3.
Mhm. So,
Episode
Miss Nati,
Yes.
there's lots of people actually asking why are we putting this show on? Why are we having Terp Talks? And it's a good question. I want to address that first because it's our community that we want to really engage in this advocacy. So why are we putting on Terp Talks every week?
Yeah, season 1 was primarily because we wanted to have our interpreters' voices be heard in the face of the pandemic, in the face of TikTok, in the face of bullying of interpreters, especially news interpreters. That was our main theme: getting our voices out there, getting to for the netizens to know who are our interpreters and what they do and the hard work that they all do just to give access to the deaf. For season 2, we're gonna bring that a notch higher. We wanted
Mhm.
to not just getting those interpreters, our voices heard, and for them to get to know us, but now it's more of getting to understand more the what what does it take to be an interpreter. So
Right.
last week we had allyship.
Mhm.
This week we have, if you've seen our posters, it's power dynamics. And probably most of us have seen that word phrase for the first time. So it's really making ourselves equipped as interpreters to be ready for the bigger task ahead of us. I know this would be with FSL, the Filipino Sign Language Law. Happy FSL Day yesterday to our deaf friends. With this FSL law coming and more demand for interpreters, there will be a huge demand, I'm sure. So we have to get ourselves ready. And through Terp Talks, we are equipping our interpreters the knowledge, the information, the skills, perhaps,
Mhm.
through our conversations with our friends whom we know can very well give that information. And
Yeah.
I
I
say,
and I agree with you,
Miss
pati po yung pusa.
Universe from
Pati
Iloilo
po yung
State.
pusa nyo sa background, nag-agree din. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so yung ating Terp Talks is leveling up, and pati naman nakita mo sa background namin, medyo level up. Ang ganda ng ceiling ni Miss Isha, parang shine bright like a diamond.
Shine.
And so
And we have
the
background
background,
music now.
may background music, may new
May pusa.
format. Yeah, and new topics, new people, new ways to really open the discussion of interpreting dito sa ating community in the Philippines. So thank you so much for providing us this platform, Miss Nati.
Yeah. And for our
True,
viewers,
true.
shares, like, and subscribe of our YouTube. Yeah, we're also in YouTube. So share, like, and subscribe. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Thank you, Miss Nati. And also comment. We want to hear from you. We want to know where you're from, and kung there's a visitor coming to your area, where would you take them? Where would you take me kung maglilibre ka? Okay, so let's introduce our next host without further ado. He is a very, very special person. He's a friend of mine. He's a friend of yours. He's a friend to all interpreters. He's the Sydney Poitier of interpreting, and he's black. Sir Jeff Bowden. Deaf applause.
Yes, you got
Welcome.
yeah, you named four things and one of them is definitely right.
Which one?
Let's see, so many, gosh, so I got the Sydney 48 part. Obvious. But I'm so happy to be here. It's 10 o'clock. Well, let's see, what time is it? It's about 10:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Washington, D.C. The
Mhm.
temperature is around 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Mhm.
So it's fall, it's autumn here. The leaves are changing, are falling from the trees. It was raining a lot, and things are well. Of course, we have the COVID here. COVID-19 is taking all of us by storm, and we're in the middle of a presidential election, so all of that's on the media as well. I think with that comes the another addition to our whole profession is working with deaf interpreters. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it broadcast, where if a governor or a official is giving an update on the number of cases or strategies, more than likely you're seeing a deaf interpreter working with a hearing interpreter sitting up front. And now we have to deal with shields and face masks, but how do we get our face seen by the deaf interpreter? So we're using all kinds of devices and things to try to make sure that our faces are seen at the same time that we're interpreting. I did a job the other day and but it fogs up. You know, you're wearing something like a welder's mask and you're talking and it all of a sudden I sweat and I bring a lot of heat. Next thing you know, that I'm all fogged up. So that's what's happening in Washington. I'm so glad to be here, and let's get started. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Sir Jeff, you're a mind reader. I have my notes here, and I was gonna say, oh, what's happening with the COVID situation? What's happening with the presidential blah blah blah? And you just, do we need even to be here? I mean, yeah. Let's get started. This is a very interesting topic. It's power dynamics. But for some people who are relatively new to the field, who haven't really talked about what power dynamics are and what they entail, can you give us an example or give us an explanation of what power dynamics is?
The way it was shared with me so many years ago is the innate access, entitlement, decision-making, and deference to us as interpreters who are working between two different communities and the subject matter that we're interpreting. And with that comes a weight of authority, of the kind of integrity, the kind of influence that we bring to the job. The deaf people think we should know everything about what's being said by the hearing person. The hearing person think we should know everything there is to know about the deaf person. And we're in the middle trying to navigate the dynamics between the deaf person having equal role in communication, equal role in making decisions, equal role in their authority, and at the same time with the hearing people recognizing respect and honoring their presence. And so our power dynamic begins because we're aligned to the hearing person because we can hear, but we're aligned to the deaf community because of our sign language background and our investment in the community and the culture, is to make sure we have that balance so that we are not giving the deaf people a chance, an impression that we're stealing all of their riches in their culture and their language and using it against them. And at the same time, we're not taking advantage of our hearingness to get access to things that hearing people normally would not have access to if they weren't an interpreter. So that's
Right.
kind of how power dynamics works in my perspective.
Yeah, and because a lot of interpreters here, they feel interpreting is all about your hands in the air and signing. But because we're dealing with people and relationships and, the oppression of deaf people, it's part and parcel of our job to really understand those concepts so that we can be a true ally. Because as you can see, all these topics are connected to each other.
Yeah.
Allyship to relationship dynamics, and to our guest next week. That's a surprise. But this is now a platform for us to really open, because it's really uncomfortable sometimes to talk about this kind of stuff. Because perhaps an interpreter in the past made a decision that they didn't know was actually oppressive to deaf people, but we can see that any decision you make can make some sort of impact or ripple effect, or can taint or your reputation. You know what I mean? So it's really timely that we talk about relationship dynamics, and I hope that you can give us more enlightenment in this subject.
Yeah, this is the perfect time to introduce the whole ideal of the power dynamic. I think I went a good 8 or 9 years in my interpreting, not realizing how I was using my presence to control the interpreting process, to control the interpreting environment. And once I recognized how much I was influencing it, it changed everything about how I approached the assignment, how I introduced myself to the deaf client, the consumer. Sometimes you vacillate between the two words. They're clients or they're your consumers. And each time you use those words, you change how you perceive them. And then of course the hearing people. So this is a perfect for all.
Oh no, what happened? Dance break. Thanks, Adrian. We're really working hard to give you all the technical stuff, and the backstage people are amazing. We just want to give them a shout out. I think that was Adrian saying, "Hey, what about me?" So, hi, Adrian. Okay, so go ahead, sir. Maybe you can give us an example, like an actual situation where power dynamics can be in play.
My most recent one, and it's really a matter of an empowered deaf person recognizing a power dynamic was being played. I was on an assignment with a very accomplished deaf person who was the project manager for an amazing program. And it came down to them having to travel to a country in order to oversee the progress of this program. And so myself and another interpreter who was not aware of this person's interpreter savvy, their depth of knowledge in the subject, and their empowered presence, proceeded to do things that should have been left to the deaf person to decide. One scenario was the deaf person was in a meeting with a few members of the team, and a PowerPoint presentation was being shown on the board. And the deaf person would look at the board and then look at some notes and look at the board, look at some notes. But the presenter, who was hearing and not signing, would continue to talk while the deaf person was looking away. So the other interpreter raised their hand and said, "Sir, I need to ask you, please do not talk while the deaf person is looking away, because
Wow.
they cannot see you." Well, in a few years ago, when I first started interpreting, that would have been perfectly legitimate and quite appropriate. But the deaf person wanted to have not only the control over who they chose as interpreters, but also the relationship in the whole dynamic of the meeting. So the deaf person in the middle of the meeting cautioned that other interpreter, "Please do not interrupt the speaker again. If I have a problem following what they're saying, I will speak up for myself."
Mm-hmm.
And it really put a pall over the whole room, because now the hearing people go, "Oh my God." Because I had to voice that, as the deaf person was saying, with the type of energy and the type of effectiveness that she was sharing. And
Good for you.
the
Yeah.
hearing people were like, "Oh my God, this was not just some token individual who's disabled. This person
Mm.
controls the dynamic of the meeting." And it really made them respect her more. The other
Mhm.
interpreter, although I have to apologize for her, or maybe not, but I feel bad for her that she was put on the spot. It was embarrassing for her. But
Yeah.
in the middle
Can
of
imagine.
but at the end of and this was like 3 or 4 days of us doing this meeting, each next encounter was a matter of honoring her presence. The individuals who normally in their culture would honor anybody with disabilities maintained at such a high register, they thought they were talking to an ambassador or someone. So I think
Mhm.
that was one of the examples of how the power dynamic came into play. The interpreter thinking they're doing the right thing by interjecting some communication processes and protocols, but not checking with the deaf person and giving deference to them first. Because easily with sign language, you can ask the deaf person, "Do you mind if I ask them to stop talking while you're looking down?" Then the
Mhm.
deaf person can say, "No, no, no, I'm okay." Or
Mhm.
they can say, "Oh, wow, thank you, I need that." But
Mhm.
if you just chime in and say, "I'm going to take control on behalf of the deaf people. I want to do things for them," as opposed
Mhm.
to with them and collaboration with them. There you see, I think, of an example I can bring up about that.
Yeah, and it's great that where you are, there are a lot of empowered deaf people that can speak up and say that.
Yeah,
Here in the Philippines, though, unfortunately, it's the opposite.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
one example of power dynamics that I notice is that in a classroom setting, the interpreter would interpret away, and there's a lag time, right? And when the teacher says, "Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have any comments?" The interpreter is still catching up, and you know before the deaf person can put up their hand, we move on to the next topic. And what the interpreter does is, because of their fear of voicing, they would tell the deaf person, "Oh no, we're on the next topic now,"
yeah.
or that kind of thing. So uh, maybe Miss Isha, do you see that happening in our community?
Yes, yes, a lot. And I think what's interesting is that now that we're talking about this, we get to become aware that there are these things that shouldn't be happening. But because we don't know these things before, we just let it happen, and we don't really know how to address them, or we're not even conscious that they're happening. And I think also this conversation about power dynamics, it's also important that the deaf also learn, we also empower the deaf, because like what Sir Bai said, a lot of the deaf, well, here in the Philippines, they're a minority, and coming from a lot of the deaf who are empowered come from the big cities, but from the small towns, they're not as empowered. So when those things happen, they don't, like, they themselves would just have to move back, and they don't really assert their rights to access, and they just say that, oh, that's how it's been going on. So we just let it happen. But I think it's also important that the deaf also know that there is such a thing as power dynamics, and that they also can be part to, they can also like be in a position to control that situation, or at least balance that power with the interpreter. So I think this is, it's very interesting to bring this amongst ourselves as interpreters, but it's also important to discuss this with the deaf themselves, and with the interpreters and the deaf as well. So this is really a good
Yeah,
conversation.
in the beginning, when we were talking about access and equal involvement with conversations and things, sometimes in our workshops and sometimes I see seasoned interpreters, they would do certain gestures that meant that the person would not move on because they saw the interpreter hand go up like this. And they go, oh, is there something over here going on? It's, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm just making sure that the question that you asked, the deaf person got it too. Um, they asked us as interpreters to get to the assignment early enough to be able to meet with the presenter or the teacher and to share what our role is as an interpreter, that we are not to provide advice or influence, that we will be translating from American English into American Sign Language and back, and that there is that sort of turn-taking rules, that
Mhm.
once you say something, I know that I have to process it and give it out. That person is receiving my sign language, processing it, and then going forward. And those are the time lag options that will take place when we are interpreting. Hopefully, the presenter is recognizing that. But also, we talk about power dynamics. When I do this, and the person is seeing the interpreters do that, they go, "Wow, what's going on in that corner?" The person raised their hand. So while there's good power dynamics and there's bad power dynamics, there's also communication power dynamics. How do we equal the playing field?
Right. That's interesting
Yeah,
when you
right,
say
right.
communication power dynamics. So as you know, there are situations where, in the Philippines, where we as interpreters are only limited by our own skill, right? And so what happens is that, so for a deaf person who wants, who needs access using Filipino Sign Language, sometimes they don't get that preference. So that in itself is a power dynamic imbalance, because you have an interpreter there that's supposed to be empowering them, but because of their mode, or their inability to match the communication needs of the deaf, that deaf person doesn't get anything out of that whole session,
Right.
right? So it goes back to even accepting the assignment in the first place. I mean, that's the very first thing that I learned, is knowing and understanding your limits, when to say no, when to refer to somebody else, because a lot of power dynamics is just shifting the power to somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? Not focusing it on the self.
Mm-mm.
So
Yeah, that is in the, when we look at especially the 2020 interpreter training, the 2020 interpreter preparation, the 2020 interpreter involvement in the process. And you mentioned about, wow, the influence in the empowered deaf person. That's not something that happened all along. I mean, this is really in the last 20 years ago, because of the access to interpreters, because of the breaking of the glass ceiling or even a concrete ceiling for advancement and job placements, because of the degrees. I mean, I know more deaf people with PhDs than I know of hearing people with PhDs. And so that whole dynamic has changed everything about what we do because of their accomplishments on their own. And now you're looking at it from a whole different perspective as far as the interpreter choosing their interpreters. You almost have to be sure. We're almost auditioning every time we go on an assignment now.
yeah.
Before you go on an assignment, I am the interpreter, and you have no other choice but me. So work with me or
Mm.
work with no one. But now in the past 15, 20 years or so, it's okay. I like you. I think you have some good skills. Now I come back when you're ready. And you go, oh my gosh, I used to be able to walk in on a job and decide I'm there. Now I have to go back and hopefully get the approval that I'm there. And then, of course, everyone has the ability to make the determination. You mentioned about this assessing whether or not you're good for that assignment. It doesn't matter if you're a seasoned interpreter or a beginning interpreter. If the deaf person doesn't understand you, you're not qualified. You could have a
Right.
PhD in the subject. You could have 20 years of interpreting experiences. You could be training of the interpreters. But when you get on the assignment, it's still up to the deaf person and the relationship and then the respect to accept you or not. And the scenarios that we have in our testing models point to that every time. Are you respecting the culture? Are you respecting the deaf person?
Right, right. I would agree because a lot of interpreters, like here in the Philippines, we have very few interpreters, and there are some interpreters who've been in the community who've been doing this work for years, and yet, but they would just they feel entitled that because of the years that they have, like they're the best interpreters. And I know some people who are like that, and what's sad is because they only see themselves and according to their skill, but they don't really pay attention to how much the deaf understands them, and again with the respect to the culture. And I think it's important to bring this into light because a lot of these things are happening, but again the deaf would feel that they don't have the power to talk about these things. And even if they have the preference, if the interpreter would assert himself for that job, and it's usually the deaf would just say, okay, because he's the one available. And that's not fair for the deaf person to just have to settle with an interpreter that they don't understand, first of all, and someone who doesn't understand their culture, when it doesn't respect their culture as deaf persons. So it's really good to have this to talk about these.
Yeah.
And it continues to be a struggle also in our communities with very few interpreters, and some interpreters have reached that level when they plateau, and they don't know how to, or they no longer have advanced in their skills. And but it's important for us to be aware that there are new interpreters coming in, and some of them are more skilled than older interpreters, and it's really up for us to evaluate ourselves in terms of our relationship with the deaf and our skills as interpreters as well.
Yeah. Very good point, Miss Ishat. I think. We have a comment here.
It's from Miss Lucy Tan J. There is also a problem between regular teacher and the interpreter. Most regular teachers don't really give much value to the deaf and the SPED teachers. Sad fact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, like what Sir Bai said, this is a difficult topic to be talking about. But yeah, it's true. That's the reality that we have here.
Yeah, with our sped teachers, Jeff, just to let you know, uh, they are they have dual roles. So a lot of them are teachers that also are interpreters slash interpreters. So sometimes what happens in the classroom is because of their different hats and what they have to do, they can't focus 100% on communication facilitation. They have to do other stuff and you know photocopy papers and deal with other students. So they're not able to really give that full access to the deaf.
Mm.
Yeah, and so we're working towards making that distinction that teaching and interpreting should be separate.
Yeah. The and those things. I mean, one of the things I'm not sure I say your name right. Is that
Ishat.
is that is that was in that right now in the United States there are lots of interpreters. I mean, there's a joke once about three guys on a train, and one guy's from Russia, and one guy is from Cuba, and one guy is deaf. And so they all share the same car. And the Russian guy pulls out the most expensive bottle of vodka, and he pours some for his friends and he pours some for himself. And there's a good amount left in the bottle, and he throws it off the train. And people are amazed. Look at this. We all know the value of this alcohol you just threw away. And the guy laughs and rubs his stomach and says, ha ha, in my country, we have plenty of vodka. And so the Cuban guy is the next guy, and he pulls out this most expensive cigars, and he gives his comrades some, and then he smokes. He takes maybe one or two puffs, and then he takes the open the window of the train and throws the cigar off the train. And people go, "Wait, what are you doing? This cigar was made from the best tobacco in Cuba. How could you possibly throw it away?" In my country, we have lots of cigars. So now the deaf person with his interpreter is looking at everything, and then all of a sudden he just grabs the interpreter and throws him off the train. And then the guy said, "What are you doing? What are you throwing your interpreter off the train for?" He said, "Oh, in my country we have lots of interpreters." And so in the United States there are lots of interpreters. So we oftentimes are thrown off the train. But in the 70s and 80s, there weren't a lot of us. So you had to value us a lot more, and we could come in and call the shots. And they knew that, oh gosh, if I don't use this interpreter, there's only another one in another state, in another city away that I have to try to navigate. I don't want to use my daughter and my son anymore to interpret. This is a staff meeting; they won't allow it. And so there was a lot of resistant tolerance for the interpreter because there weren't so few, and now there are a lot. So one of the things about the power dynamics now is that there are a lot of interpreters hopefully growing in their field and growing in their experiences in the Philippines. And now you're going to have so many. But are you all on the same standards? Are you still have the same level? Are you still looking for the same relationship with the deaf community and the hearing community and our roles? And now we have to be sure that we get so good and so plentiful that if they throw one of us off the train, there's another one that can come behind us.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have that luxury here. There's very few of us to throw off the train. But it's interesting because of the fact that there's so very few of us. It's sometimes the interpreter themselves, knowing that they will never run out of work, right? Permit themselves to do some questionable behavior.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So that in itself is something that we also have to take a look at. And because you're right, more interpreters are going to come in, and we're going to come to a point where there's so many interpreters, and we have to make sure that we are, following a standard, so that, and if you're not, then you're probably going to be left behind.
Well, the two things that maintain us seasoned interpreters with a high level of attention to our skills and what we're doing has been the writing end of the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, the organization that has been able to lobby with contracts and government entities and organizations. They maintain that if the interpreter doesn't reach a certain standard, their certification can be revoked. That interpreter would not be able to work. And even as an interpreter who's had certification and has been a moment of time when I didn't have my certification and then I got it again, there was that nervousness. Oh my gosh, if I don't have my certification, I cannot do those jobs. So it's the empowered tenacity that is ultimately, it's not, it's a process, it's a movement, but it ultimately has to be, is really recognized, and all the interpreters sort of encourage each other. We have to do this, y'all. We have to get a certificate or a letter or something from tenacity that we can take to these organizations, this government office, what have you, and say that we all have agreed, we have all signed on for the standard that we're raising right now. And if we do not adhere to that, then we will lose access. It's so slow. I mean, in the beginning, I could do any job anywhere I want. Now, I cannot. I have to have my credentials.
Yeah, here we don't have an ethics police or any kind of system where, if an interpreter is doing more harm than good, that there's no system of grievance. Unfortunately, as of yet, we're still a baby profession. We're still, we're still growing. But that in itself, is another example of power dynamic, because to many hearing people that are laymen who don't understand about deafness and deaf culture, interpreters will take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So an interpreter will call themselves an interpreter, but only have basic sign language.
Yeah.
right? And that is a, well, it's a disservice to the deaf person for sure. And a lot of the times when,
It
again,
is.
when we talk about power dynamics, it's the self versus the other, and those values have to be weighed. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the relationship with Panasli and the Filipino National Association for the Deaf, or however, the opportunity for deaf people to be involved um, in the legislation and in the access and in the voice of advocacy, those things have to have a balance in a relationship. Understand that our interpreter organization worked in a vacuum until we started to work collaboratively with the national associations of the deaf.
Hmm.
Deaf organization had their own interpreter criteria and certification. NAD
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, and 4.
Hmm.
RID said, okay, we have the CICT, the Certificate of Interpretation, the Certificate of Transliteration. Now we changed to the NIC, the National Interpreters Certification. And then even in that, until recently, was divided up into three categories: the NIC, the
Hmm.
advanced, and then the master. And everyone wanted to be the master interpreter, obviously, for the
Yeah.
pride or thing. But it wasn't until they included deaf people in the on the board of directors, they included deaf people in the evaluation team, and then especially when you're looking at the various videotapes that will give certification to a deaf person, and knowing that a deaf person is to interpret, and knowing that a deaf person is evaluating that interpreter. And so now we know that our skills are not being monitored by hearing colleagues. It's being monitored by deaf people who've already been through years and years of oppression, and saying,
Hmm.
I'm not certifying that person because of these types
Hmm.
I am certifying this interpreter because they have these skills.
Yeah, yeah, it's good to have that equalizer, to have them involved. But another thing that's also happening here in the Philippines is that in remote areas where there's only one interpreter for the entire city, what happens is that interpreter is learning to sign, and the deaf community is always trying to get them to interpret for them. And the power dynamic is actually towards the deaf, who are taking advantage of this interpreter,
Yeah,
where you're supposed to have a deaf heart. You know what I mean? You're supposed to come here and
yeah,
volunteer for me, interpret for me all the time. If you
yeah.
don't, then you shouldn't be part of the. That kind of
Oh, yeah.
dynamic is still in the Philippines, actually. So we
It is.
have to also
Right.
acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, it's not so much. I have to, again, it's a process from my introduction in interpreting in 1979, 1980. I know I'm telling my age. Some of you all were just in diapers. I don't care.
Mhm.
But it's that, in the blocks of time, and I put it in segments of 7 years. And so for me, from let's say 80 to 87, the machine model was always available. Be paid or not be paid. Our biggest fear is that deaf people would label us as not being deaf friendly, and so or not being available. And then from 86 maybe to 92, a whole new level of awareness, and the cultural and linguistic integrity came in. And
Mhm.
then from 96 to, 92 to about 2000, deaf people started acquiring better jobs and more advancements, and the relationship between the interpreter as a professional and not a colleague and not an advocate, but someone who comes into being a matter of a instrument of access and communication. But again, not the model as in being a machine. And the year 2000, and now 2000 and onward, even more advancements. So, if I in the 7 year blocks that I tried to outline, you can see where you are, and it's a tandem. Deaf people get better jobs, more respect for the interpreter. Interpreter
Mhm.
recognizes that deaf people have acquired their education and their access to jobs, and they give more deference to the deaf people. So it's a you know
Mm.
a way of seeing each other kind of. I think you said something about the craft system. You pull someone up, as opposed to holding them back down. You're from the ground up pulling them down, or you're on top of the wall pulling them up. Depends on how you manage that.
Yeah. So in these communities, with crab theory, it's very, what we talked about in the beginning of interpreter training, because this is the essence of power dynamics, right? Sometimes when you see someone going up, the tendency is trying to pull them down so that you can be at their level at some point. And it's not just interpreters versus interpreters, it's deaf and interpreter, it's interpreter and institution. So it's all these different players and stakeholders that are into play. But I'm wondering how we can support these interpreters, though. Like we don't want them to be burned out. We don't want them to feel like they're being taken advantage of to a point where they don't want to be involved in the community anymore.
Yeah.
So how do we problem solve this, do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and the vein that it's something I cannot relate to in my own professional growth. I've seen it happen in other countries, Africa in particular, and some of the other countries that are developing. You get that story all the time. In Uganda, I know a gentleman who would travel he talks about traveling and spending nights under mango trees, only to get up the next morning and walk another 20 miles and finally get to the village to handle a situation, and then have to walk back, and there's no compensation anywhere in that process at all. Everything he has to fend for himself, but he has a heart that knows that this situation in this village some 30 miles away is going to require him to be involved with it. And here in the United States, we're spoiled. We know that we don't have those issues. I mean, I could easily say, well, an interpreter from Manila could maybe dedicate 3 weeks to come up to that part of the country. And if they have lodging and perhaps, some sort of collaboration and support, they could be that second interpreter, and another interpreter can get a rest and a break. But how feasible is that suggestion? Is that something that could be done? And is that, does that help the situation as far as teaching the deaf community? You're really working this deaf interpreter to death. They really are going to become resentful if we don't do something about it. So can the Filipino National Association for the Deaf, or the advocacy groups that are deaf in the organization, say we're hurting ourselves by imposing so much of a demand on them and no regard for their psychological and their physical and their spiritual development and strength and endurance? Because if you mess with my psychological endurance, my physical interpreting was not going to make any difference. I'm worn out. I'm burnt out. And from my spiritual, which is the deaf part, has been burnt out, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it grudgingly. I'm going to really hate doing these assignments. And if you wear me out physically, it doesn't matter if I'm excited mentally to process the information, or I'm enthusiastic about the advances and opportunities to work collaboratively with the deaf community. I'm developing carpal tunnel on my hands, my shoulders have these aches and pains. I'm not eating right. I'm not resting well. So there has to be that kind of education. That's why I was mentioning the young lady in that job. Her interpreter savvy was, wait, I want my interpreters to have a break. We will stop right now. Why? Not because we finished talking. It's because the interpreters need a break. That kind of, and even if we could go another 30, it gives us almost enough energy to go another 30 minutes because you cared about me. So, now I can go further because I really feel so much. I feel exhilarated that you thought about me. Okay, don't have to stop. We can keep going. That's all I really needed was some consideration.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, we need some more trainings. We need to provide this information out there. And this is a call to all interpreters in remote areas. If you need help and support, you have to contact us at PNASLI, because we don't know what's going on where you're at if you don't let us know, and so that we can figure out how we can support you in that way. And you mentioned mangoes, because I know that that's your favorite. And this might be actually a good time. We have a segment in TerpTalks called Who Got Blind. Do you know what a hugot is, Sir Jeff?
No.
A hugot is literally, it's to pull out, to hugot.
Oh, okay.
But it's like a word of wisdom. It's like a saying, and I'm inviting the viewers to also type in your hugot lines because it'll be fun to see our interpreter, Miss Febe, sign that for
Struggle.
us. Yeah, struggle to do those hugot because they're very challenging. So since our topic is power dynamics, Miss Isha, do you have any hugots for us?
Uh, I'm not
I
really
got
good
one.
at this. Well, yeah, okay. You go. You,
Sige.
you go first.
Yeah, so here's my hugot line. Kung sinong may power, siguro hindi na Rexona. Yeah. So like in the beginning we had that song "We Got the Power."
Yeah.
I've got the power. So it's like a long running joke here in the Philippines. It's all about the kili kili
Call the
power.
kili power.
Well,
Yeah.
one of mine is, and I've been using it now with some of the things that are going on in the world, is never poke a tiger with a short stick.
Let's see how Miss Febe does it. Never poke a tiger with a short stick. Yan. So the real meaning is
Well, you know how a tiger doesn't like to be bothered. So if you're going to poke one, you should have a really long one so you have a
No.
space to get away. But if you
Mhm.
poke it with a short stick, you have
Mhm.
no options. And now
Yeah.
the tiger, who it was minding his own business in the first place, is now going to turn around and take care of you.
Yeah. And maybe all in all, just avoid the tiger altogether, right? And just like focus on kittens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have to poke a tiger, make sure you have a really long stick.
Yeah. So we have a comment.
We have a hugot line from Miss Ju Virata. Kung kaya ng iba, edi ipagawa mo sa kanila. Yes. If
So
other people can do it, then let them do it. I would say,
Yeah.
I would agree with that because
Mhm.
during TerpTalks I was dreading to be given the interpreting assignment, but we have better interpreters, so let's just give it to them. Okay. I'll just be a guest. I'll just
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And that's what gets us in trouble. Sometimes we are the best interpreter that is out there. And we
Mhm.
want to keep giving it to someone else. When are you going to grow? When are you going to expire? When are you going to advance? I
Yeah.
think I was born with one major trait. I'm not sure if it's arrogance or boldness or bravery or ego. And I think all of those things come into play at some point. Because I would take on assignments and I would go to interpreting assignments when I really should have taken a step back and said, wow, you should be nervous. You really should, be intimidated. But I was never now that was before I had higher regard for skills. Now that I have a higher regard for skill level and my ability to work collaboratively with a deaf person, my apprehension is, am I good enough to work with that deaf person? But in the beginning of my career, it was a lot of arrogance and ego and boldness. I think some of the people who remember me back then, one thing they remember most about me said, man, you thought you was the thing. You was all of that. And I really didn't see it that way. But now that I think about it, it's kind of what got me into doing so many different interpreting assignments that I normally would not have done if I was shy or intimidated or wanted to give it to someone else. And now, some 30 years ago, 30 years now, 30 years later, I think those were the right things that for me to have at that time because of my skill level and because of my professionalism. Later, I realized, you know what, you are a bit arrogant. You are too egotistical. You really wasn't the right person for that job. And then I started to slow down that part of me and say, well, now what do I need to do to get better so that it can at least match my ego or match my match my arrogance?
Yeah, I have a mantra actually that says, "Do what's uncomfortable," because that's the only way you grow, right? And I had that same experience when I was in my beginning years of interpreting, where I was a male interpreter. I was of a minority, which was rare where I was from in Canada, and so I always thought, oh, I'm always going to get work because of that fact, right? But like you said, it's a perception. There's a perception also that we also have to manage, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're seen as too out there or too I mean, you can take it as a grain of salt, right? You can't make everybody like you, for example.
Right.
But you can still in terms of your actions and your behaviors, just have some thought behind it. Like, don't just out of impulse, okay, I'm going to accept this work, and this is because it's going to be good for my resume,
Yeah.
and I'm going to get paid.
Yeah.
So before that's okay. That's a okay thing, but also have a little bit of a deeper thought where, well, if I do take this job, how does it affect a deaf person? Will they get the service that they deserve?
Yeah.
Will there be something that happens where I screw up, and we only have our reputations, right? Like I said, here we don't have an ethics police, but we do have a reputation, and our community does talk about those interpreters and what they do, and the situations that happen to them, right? And again, it's just about being mindful of that. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay to get work, but we just have to ask ourselves on another level: is it really okay? That kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the mentorship part. I had a few interpreters who would actually be able, comfortable enough and strong enough in their own confidence about themselves to say, Jeffrey, I think you're really a bit too arrogant. I think you're really stretching beyond your skill sets. And I had to be humble enough to accept that feedback as well. Mentorship in a field that you're growing and trying to develop a reputation is a good thing to have. Because your reputation could go. You won't hear everything that's said about you. You won't know what everybody thinks about you, but somebody else will know. They would have a conversation with them and never tell you. But if that person is a mentor, that person has a relationship with you, they can convey to you, okay, not so much that I'm spreading rumors or I'm hearing the word on the street is that you're this or that, but just when you have those conversations, you check in with those people. They say to you, I see you've been pretty busy lately. So how you doing? "No, I'm doing pretty good. So I heard you took this conference job the other day." So yeah. So how do you think it went? So I think I was that. So are you sure? Am I sure? Yeah. Are you sure it went well? Of course it did. How do you know? And have comfort level to bring them to a sense of talking honestly about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mentorship is really a good thing. I don't know how many of that is available, or do mentors know that you don't have to be a mentor on interpreting skills? You can be a mentor on just your persona and your professionalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great to have like an outside perspective, right? Because
True.
what happens also is like we're done work, and usually a hearing person would come up to us and say, "Oh, you're so you're great signing. You're so beautiful." They don't understand what we were signing, but they would let us know like how great we are, and how great of a person we are for our heart and our wanting to help the deaf.
Yeah. Oh goodness. How many times? And if you live on that diet, it's like eating McDonald's every day. You're going to get fat. It's just going to gain weight,
Right.
not good weight, and you're going to clog your arteries. You're going to be sluggish.
Not fat in the body, fat in the head.
Yeah, but the same type of circulation. And you wonder, well, gosh, how did I become this monster? It's that when you're living on a diet of fast food, you really need someone that's going to give you great minerals of advice and support and evaluation and feedback. I know a lot of young interpreters, when I ask them, how did I do? They're taken aback and saying, "Oh my God, Jeff, why are you asking me how did you do? Of course you did well. You're Jeffrey Bowden. You're supposed to have done well. You can use your little finger and sign the whole thing." And I go, "You don't understand. I'm asking you how I did because I need to know what you saw that was worth keeping, what some things confused you, and what some things you think I should not have done." As a confident interpreter, I can speak to all three of those. The one that I did good is because someone taught me how to do it. The things that confuse you, I need to analyze why did it confuse you? Because if it confused you, it may confuse the deaf person. And things that I did wrong, I need to be able to explain why it went wrong. And so it is that kind of feedback that is not from the hearing person. I remember interpreting at the feast one time, and a woman stood behind Nati, and she was just standing there for just a long, long time. And I had a feeling she wanted to say something to me. And then Nati turned around and she said, "Excuse me, may I help you?" And then the lady just ran off. But it was kind of the sense that, yeah, hearing people will come to you after an assignment and they think you're God's gift to deaf people. And if you live on that diet, you will start believing that. Nothing happens until I show up. I'm never late for an assignment because nothing happens until I get there. And he said, "Well, how dare you? How dare you be so arrogant? These people have every right to have the meeting starting on time. They have every right not to be held up by you because you think that you're so important." So again, the power dynamics come in so many facets, and it's amazing how we come into that recognition late in our careers. If I had known this early on, I probably would be, I mean, it's 30 years of interpreting. So I know I would have, still been able to persevere and learn and develop. But I think there were some mistakes and there were some perceptions about myself I would have dealt with a long time ago.
Yeah, and this
I
is
agree.
this is a message to the newer interpreters as well, because here in the Philippines we have, we try to be magalang, which is respectful. We're respectful to our elders. We're respectful to those who have seniority. But what happens is if we're in a situation where, one seasoned interpreter and a newer interpreter are partnered up together, the newer interpreter will not support the seasoned interpreter at all, because they think that, who are they to give a feed or give support? You know what I mean? And we really want to break that and ensure that everybody, no matter where, how many years they have under their belt, are our colleagues. They're our equals. And in that situation, because I've had many times where I'm voicing something and I'm struggling and I'm looking at my partner and they won't say anything, and I can see sometimes they're in their head, right? They're not present enough to give me any feeds that I can use, but a lot of the time, I would ask them afterwards, so what happened? And then they would give me some really great feeds after the fact, and I'm like, why couldn't you just say that to me while I was doing it? It would have helped the
Because we feel
interpretation.
unworthy. We feel
That's what I
unworthy
mean.
to give
We want
real-time feedback to a Bayani Generoso.
we want to break that. We want to break that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are interpreters, fortunately and unfortunately, I'm coming to an age in which a lot of the premier interpreters that I looked up to and I saw them when I was just a baby interpreter and went, "Oh my goodness, I want to be like them when I grow up." Well, now they're in their 70s and 80s, and either they stopped interpreting or they moved on. And now I'm seeing some interpreters actually, retiring out. And I'm becoming that old interpreter that people give deference to and respect to. And I'm hoping that I'm giving the young interpreters that I'm working with that comfort level that, you know what, I'm a human being. I have my flaws. I have my weaknesses. I have my bad days. I come with some skill sets, but I'm also pulling from you your skill sets. And there are things that are then they're being discussed now with the younger interpreters that I'm not prepared to speak on. I don't know what to do, what to say about it. I'm not a young interpreter anymore. So the dress code, for example, or a lot of other things in a relationship that I go, wow, I didn't have that in my day, back in the olden days. And so I'm really recognizing that my stature at this point has a lot of credibility. And I'm hoping that with that comes the awareness that I need to let the people know, let my colleagues know, my co-interpreters and the deaf people know, come on, because deaf people give you the same deference. They go, wow, you've been interpreting since I was a child. I remember you when I was in elementary school. And now you're interpreting for my medical appointment or for my child's graduation. I'm a grandparent and you're still interpreting. And sometimes that is a relationship that has budded over the years and years. And you now have to kind of still be humble enough to go, yeah, okay, I am that person you knew when you were in your teens and your early 20s, but I'm now your interpreter. I'm giving full respect and cognitive involvement with you. How do you want this job to go? The young lady that I did a doctor's appointment, and it was, I rarely do female patients, but this one was pretty topical. It wasn't reproductive medical issues or anything along that line. It was something like a skin issue, something very, very light. But I was always saying, "Do you sure you want a male interpreter?" And the response was, "Well, not only I know you, but I also have enough sense to know that if it's really very personal, I would have kicked you out of the room." So it was good to know that, you know, I can still ask those questions. Wow, are you sure I'm the one for the job?
Mm-hmm. So I think we have a
Right,
question. We have it up.
Okay. Sir Mike is asking, how do the choices made by sign language interpreters affect the perception of deaf person, and how do interpreters present a more authentic representation of someone's message?
So can we leave that up for a minute? Let's how do the choices made by sign language interpreters affect the perception of deaf persons, and how do interpreters present a more authentic representation of someone's message? Good question.
Yeah, yeah. The the choices made by the interpreter is, I mean, even in the word choices. I remember one interpreter speaking candidly about a situation in which the papers, this was a meeting, and the papers on her desk flew off on the floor. And the deaf person signed, "I'm sorry." You know, as you sometimes say, "Excuse me, I'm sorry." But the interpreter said, "My bad."
Mm.
My bad was not the right colloquial word choice for that situation. It was too casual. The statement should have been, "Pardon me," or "Excuse me." And so, but that changed the dynamic of the whole room. And I mentioned before the situation where I was working with the colleague, and you know, your word choices and your stature, everything influences, to my perception, being an interpreter, everything that has to do about the assignment. If you give deference and respect to the deaf person, everyone else will. But if you take
Right.
over their presence, everybody else will. And so
Right.
establish the precedence,
Mm.
you know, of how you. I mean, I don't come into the room ahead of the deaf person.
Mhm.
The deaf
Right.
person goes in first, and I don't establish what chairs they sit in. I'll stand until they get here and say what. Sometimes I will, depending, you know. But now, hopefully, that person could say, "I'm really having a problem." The person leading the meeting has a little bit of cultural awareness as well. And this, I always ask, "Where do you want me to sit? Where do you want me to stand?" If the seats are all taken, I'll make, you know, the necessary adjustments. But you know, the presence of the interpreter, and me being 6'2", about 200 pounds or so, give or take, you know, I have already a presence already. Most of the time,
Mm.
they think I'm security, you know, but I'm giving a deference and a respect to that person that it goes a long way. It goes a long way. So that question is really good in the interpreting process, and it's also good in our respect process, and how we empower each other.
Yeah.
Uh,
So it's about when we talk about prep work, it's not just about reading the materials or understanding the signs, but also understanding the power dynamics of the situation.
yes,
So how do you come off as, and the perception, like, because like you said, you enter a room and you can't hide the fact that you're there,
right.
right? You're interpreting. So we need to just be mindful of that.
Yeah, the scenario that I thought was really impressive was the preparation for an assignment, and the deaf person knew it was going to be contentious. There was going to be some arguing. There was going to be some power stresses between her and it wasn't a superior, but it wasn't necessarily a colleague. And when we got ready to take the assignment, she sat the interpreters down and said, "Listen, this is what I know is going to happen in this meeting.
Mhm.
I know this person is going to push back. I know this person is going to try to take over. When I need you to speak up, speak boldly, and speak with energy. Because I don't want that person to think for a minute that I'm shying away." And I was never given them kind of instructions before, ever. First
Yeah.
time I ever got instructions about how my voice made all the difference.
Right.
You know, and she said, when that person starts to interrupt, I want you to speak over top of them.
Mm-hmm.
Say, no, this is the way it's going to be. I said,
Hmm.
okay, we're going to have some fun in this assignment.
Yeah. Well, speaking of not shying away, Miss Ishat, you had some visitors there. Who were
Yes,
they?
my niece and my sister's kids.
Future
Yeah.
interpreters.
I hope
Should they be
so.
watching this?
I show them videos whenever I'm in a video call with the deaf. They always try to look and they just sign and they just say hi. They're very curious about why why the person I'm talking to isn't talking back. So they're quite hopefully I could influence them to be interpreters in the future.
Yeah.
At least
So
deaf friendly.
yes,
Yes, yes, yes,
involved in the community somehow. Being community.
yes.
I'm raising my children to be that way as well. Try to think,
Mm.
more community minded, bigger picture type thing. It'd be great if they're interpreting. I mean, I could definitely use the partner, but
True, true.
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, they're now interpreters whose sons and daughters are now interpreters. And it's funny to see them on the same assignment together.
yeah.
But
So
yeah, my daughter knows about interpreting. She has such a respect for it. She said, I would never do it. And my son, being kind of the typical male, won't pick up. He's good in receptive skills. He won't sign back to me.
Right.
But when he was playing basketball, I used to sign to him on the floor when he wasn't being aggressive enough. So his teammates teased him a lot, saying, "Why is your daddy waving his hands at you?" And he said, "He's talking to me. I wish he'd stop."
yeah. So actually, going back to your statement before about having a contentious meeting, usually deaf people don't give interpreters that heads up here, right? So what happens is we're actually in the situation and the deaf person is signing away, very emotional, and we're just kind of left uh, bamboozled, a little bit stuck of what to do. So if we were to be in that situation, how do you think we can give that power back to the deaf person? Because us not interpreting at all, it kind of takes away their voice, right?
Yeah.
Literally. So
Yeah.
so how do we resolve that situation?
Well,
do you
I mean,
think?
you and intuitively, you know that someone is actually stressed in this dynamic.
Okay.
And if it's a job interview or not job interview, a job how do you an evaluation or something? Someone just has to stand up for themselves, and you can tell by facial affect and body language, they're being agitated, they're being upset, and
Mhm.
you don't stop the interpreting and say, "Hi, are you mad?"
Mhm.
Are you upset? You kind of intuitively feel like this is where this is going. Sometimes I will use consecutive interpreting as opposed to simultaneous interpreting.
Simultaneous.
I can embrace a lot more information and process it than me trying to keep up simultaneously. Um, I know that the word choices are cool. Now, if you see, I don't know if they have sign language profanity and FSL. I know here in ASL we do have some curse words.
We do.
Okay, all right. Sometimes when they show up, it's also the environment. You can almost have a segue and say, "You really want me to use that word?" Okay, because that has other repercussions. But if it comes down to being, especially emotional situations where they're close to tears, they're grieving over something, you know, you know that you can empathically put yourself in that situation and convey it. So don't ignore the other aspects of who you are and your senses. You see things, but you also feel things. You hear things and you feel things.
Mhm.
You smell things and then you feel some way about it. And
Yeah.
so that whole emotional part of our interpreting, we cannot negate. We know the cognitive part, we know the linguistic part, but there's the emotional part. And um, you can. It's sometimes it's easier hearing the voice,
Mhm.
someone being very dynamic about what they're saying, and I'm not taking this anymore, and I'm done with it, and it's never going to happen again. And if I have anything to do with this, this is done. And we know
Mhm.
when we sign that, ooh, our
Yeah.
facial expression and our body language. But if we
Mhm.
did it with sign language.
Mhm.
What do you do with your voice?
Mhm.
Ooh, that person is not saying, I'm having a nice day. This is
Mhm.
really going to be okay with me. I'm fine.
Mhm.
That's not what they're saying. If they're hearing people see it, they know your voice is something different than what they see. They go, that person's
Mhm.
Mm.
acting more aggressively. Why are you giving me a nursery rhyme? So you
Right.
have that empathic thing.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned consecutive interpreting because I'm sure that there are a few people that don't know what that means. And it's basically we have simultaneous where we're signing at the same time as the speaker or voicing at the same time as the signer. And then we have consecutive where we wait for the entire message. So we basically have to control the room. We like
Yeah.
if we're in a situation where we have to say, sandali lang po, wait a minute, gusto ko lang kunin lahat yung sinasabi nila bago ako magsalita. I'm going to make sure that I get the entire idea first before I speak. And then they just have to wait. And if somebody tries to come in, sandali lang po. Like
Mhm.
you have to make sure that you can control that power dynamic because we want to give that to the deaf person, right? We want to make sure that they're heard and give justice to their message. So
Yeah.
that's one tool for others. If you feel stuck and you don't know what is happening and the deaf person is signing 100 miles a minute, just manage the process. Tell people you're gonna interpret one moment. You just want to see the whole thing first, and then once they're done, that's when you say, or that's when you can give them voice. It's a
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
tool.
Yeah. And then again, we're talking about power dynamics all over again. Who comes into a meeting as a non-member of the team and can tell the leader of the meeting, members of the meeting, stop talking because I'm doing something.
Us, the interpreters.
Imagine that
Yeah.
kind of power. And they give it to us because they
Mhm.
recognize that there's something happening in this room that I don't know how to control. And makes it as sign language, and that's communication. And so we come in realizing that at some point, where that we don't want to interrupt the flow of information, we oftentimes have to do something that levels to communication playing field. And
Right.
if it comes down to, excuse me, everyone, excuse me, the interpreter cannot listen to everyone at the same time.
Mhm.
That's a power infusion
Mhm.
because no one else in a staff meeting can say, everybody stop talking because this guy's running his mouth too much. Who does that in a meeting? Except the
Mhm.
interpreter can say, excuse me, I cannot hear everyone at the same time.
Right.
Or, which has always been my biggest pet peeve, is
Mhm.
someone in the back of the room using their conversation so they don't speak
Mhm.
loud enough to interrupt.
Mhm.
And then you go,
Yeah.
excuse me, we're up here in the front of the
Mhm.
room. Could you speak up?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and actually, that goes back to what Sir Mike was asking about perception. Like when I see, for example, an interpreter who is interpreting, and then the speaker is not clear. So what do they do? Do they say the speaker is not clear, or do they say the interpreter is not understanding? Right. So it gives the onus on who are we shifting
Mm.
the
Yeah,
the, the blame to, right?
yeah.
Because a lot of the time I see people always shifting to the speaker. Oh, they're fast, they speak too fast, right? But that's not.
I do that.
Yeah. So again, about the perception, we as interpreters can control that perception of what's happening in the room, the dynamics, and informing the deaf people what's going on, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
knowing that your face has probably told a deaf person a few sentences before that you missed what they said. It's
Yeah.
not a real big mystery to deaf people. They kind of know something is happening, right? They don't. They know from the facial expression. Okay, they know. And we lean. Sometimes we'll do this. We'll look at the speaker, hoping that if I see them, I can hear them better than if I, kind of keep my face forward and kind of hope that the sound would come to my ears. But it's not as well kept a secret as we think it is. We know they know something is happening.
They're
Now,
smart. Yeah.
yeah, you can't hear them or you don't understand them. Either one is a human thing. So we used to go back in my time, gosh, I can't hear them. It's my fault. I'm supposed to have super hearing. I'm an interpreter. I should be able to hear a fly landing on that leaf 2 miles away because I'm an interpreter. I can hear everything. We're not. We're not superhuman. So we have to be able to process things. And sometimes the person that's speaking is very garbled. As much as we get confused by deaf people signing really fast and mixing metaphors and using home signs and things, we get the same thing with the speaker. And we have to be willing to say, I'm human. I don't get now. Some situations we can't stop them. If it's, so what's speaking for the platform is, you're breaking protocol by saying, excuse me, Mr. President, could you repeat what you just said a few minutes ago? Because I didn't do that.
Right.
So you have to kind of go with, but that's when closure comes into it. Hopefully the speaker is giving you enough information before and after that the middle part can be provided as the speech goes on. And you can also repair, So there's some techniques to get through that. But if the speakers go down and the electricity goes off, you're happy because it's mechanical. It's nothing I had anything to do with me as a human.
Yeah, and I think it's really great that we're giving concrete examples as well, and I want to welcome our deaf viewers who are watching because they know more about what's what goes on in the interpreting setting. If you're a deaf person, please let us know what situations might have happened in the past where there were power dynamics. Interpreters as well, if you want to give us some examples so we can open this discussion up. I do think we have a question from Sir Mike as well. Let's bring that up.
Okay. Interpreters have a great deal of power, and we have a tremendous responsibility. The hearing parties are relying upon our language to help form their impression of whether the deaf party is genuine and credible, and vice versa. I agree. We do. We do have that great deal of power. I remember back in 2017, if Sir Bai, you remember this, that's the first time I met you and Sir June Sevilla for that Red Cross training for 5 days. And then there was one, I think it was a discussion after the training on um, CPR. And then the deaf were asking, how are we gonna ask the patient or the person whom we have to do CPR? If, for example, that person is hearing and I'm deaf, so how do I ask those questions? Because you have to, there are some questions you have to ask to check the consciousness of the person and stuff like that. And there was this Sir Bai, you were interpreting for the speaker or their lecturer or the trainer. And then there was this one deaf, he recalled the situation when he had to, I think it was his mother, it was a personal experience that had something to do with CPR or his mother fainting or something. And he was very emotional in trying to speak up. But you were, Sir June at that time was sitting down. So it was your turn to interpret for the speaker. And then there were actually 7 of us interpreters also in that training. And then there was this one deaf participant. He didn't know who would voice for him because you were interpreting for the speaker. And he was like, he was respecting the break that Sir Jun was having while waiting for his turn to go on deck for interpreting. And I saw him, he was just looking at the room and he didn't know who would voice for him and he was looking at me. And I wasn't very familiar with his signs because I only met him like twice. So I wasn't, and I'm not very good at voicing. So he was looking at the room, looking for people to voice for him, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, just wanting to express it, but he didn't know how. And then Sir June stood up and he said, "Okay, you sign it." And then he even asked Sir June, "But who would voice for me?" And then Sir June
Mhm.
said, I will voice for you." And that's
Mhm.
when he he had that confidence to sign what he wanted to say. And I think that's a very I still remember that very vividly, because I see the very important role of interpreters. And like what you said, we're who comes into a meeting and tells a speaker to, okay, just hold on for a bit. That's us. And
Mhm.
it's also up to us to take that stand in that
Yeah.
room, because otherwise that deaf would not be able to be heard, and he would not be
Mhm.
able to say what he wanted to say. And I think that's I keep that memory, because I want to always remember that we have that power, and we have that, like what Sir Mike said, we have that responsibility of giving the voice for the deaf. And so I want to always be remembered of that. And I also want to be remembered that I have to improve my voicing, so that
Mhm.
when it happens again, I would have that that capability. I would be confident enough to voice for a deaf person who would be in that experience as well. So yeah, I think it's I'm really happy to be talking about this now, because back then it was just a scenario in my head. But now that the concept has a name, it's power dynamics at play. And I'm glad that we get to put a name to the situations before, and so that we can use this also to educate others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
The question, I kind of have a question too, and maybe it's just a perception of terminology. Influence versus power, and influence dynamics and power dynamics. And maybe it's a little bit too abstract for us to deal with this at this time. But if we err on the side of influencing, or do we err on the side of exuding a power? And we know the influence has a lot of meanings to me. I could probably say that you influenced by your age, you influenced by your experience, you influenced by your title, and when you're trying to exact influence on someone, you're trying to convince them for their best interests.
Mhm.
You're trying to get a point across. You're trying to achieve a goal. If you're a politician, you're trying to influence voters to vote for you. If you're a business person, you're trying to influence people to buy products from you. You don't have the power to make them do it. You just have the influence to kind,
Influence.
you know,
Mhm.
accommodate them, or not accommodate maybe, but you know. So does that word influence ring anything to you? Or this kind of thing? Wow, influence. Are we better at trying to think of ourselves as being influence dynamic or power dynamic?
I think it's because it's connected to our Filipino culture and have how we want to make things very polite, very political. Uh, you know, making sure that we don't be too curt. We're not too direct,
Mhm.
right? And when we say influence, I think we mean power dynamics. We're just like in that stage of, am I really going to
Yeah, yeah,
go up? But yeah, but this is it hits the nail on the head in terms of the language that we use when we talk about our work,
yeah,
right? It's great that and I'm so happy, Miss Ishat, that you can provide these examples, because I know that our interpreters all over the Philippines are feeling the same way, that they have all these situations that they don't even look back on because it was so traumatizing for them that they just want to forget it, right? Whereas
Mm.
we kind of have to process it a little bit, just to improve our practice for the future. So if it comes up again, then we're prepared, right? That's all it is, right? Is having that situational awareness of what's going on.
yeah. But those things are really impactful. Gosh, I'm not sure I say your name right. Is is that
Ishat.
is
Ishat.
Ishat? Miss Ishat.
Ishat.
You're right. Those are the moments of our growth that says, "Wow, that thing really worked. that
Mhm.
person, that hearing person, that interpreter, this environment, that subject, this emotion, that information, this barrier, this restriction, this oppression, this then finally this solution, this opportunity, it all kind of moves, and ebbs and flows from the point of beginning where the point of emphasis was the CPR class and obtaining a certain skill set, but it moves to so many levels and to the point where it goes, it's not even about that CPR moment. It's I want to be a part of this. How do I get to be a contributor to this? How am I getting the tools to make this happen? And then knowing that, and our profession says, I'm not trying to take over, but you're going to get there. And if I can be the bridge as opposed to the car, I'm not going to take you there, but you can walk across my skills to get where you're going. And then after you finish crossing that bridge, you're done, and now I'll be there for the next person who needs to cross over.
Yeah.
You don't have a bridge everywhere, but when you need one, you're glad it's there.
Yeah. Miss Ishat, your real name is Karen, right?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yes.
Karen.
Real name? Real name?
she's
Yes. My real name
Karen.
is Peach Karen. I'm broadcasting that to the world.
but I'm just wondering because I vaguely remember that happening. Uh, the situation with the deaf person wanting to voice what happened. What happened as a result of that? Like once Sir June was able to voice uh, their story, what happened afterwards? I'm just curious.
I think he was asking. I'm not sure if he was giving a question or just giving that experience, or just like like sharing that experience.
Mhm.
I think you stopped interpreting, and then the speaker also listened as Sir June voiced, and then I remember that his question was addressed as
Mhm.
to I think he was asking if he was doing the right thing, and then
Mhm.
he was affirmed. There was a response from the speaker after that.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean. We have all have a gut, right? We have a gut instinct to want to do something about something, right? In that instance, the deaf wanted to share because they felt it was relevant. It was weighing on them. They were giving the opportunity to do so, right? And I'm suspecting that because of that, they what's happening inside of inside of them was lifted in a way, right?
Yeah,
And I can just from an outsider's point of view, just thinking about it, we were there to interpret for the deaf and for the hearing, but there were deaf people thinking that we weren't going to interpret for them. We were just interpreting for the hearing, and they should really know that it's a two-way street. The communication is
mm-mm.
both ways, right? So
Yeah,
uh, an interpreter should know that if you're interpreting, it's not just about signing, it's also about voicing for the deaf, right? So we need to
yeah.
be
that
prepared
was
for
a
that.
that was a very huge moment of realization for me, to see Sir Jun just stand up, and actually was sitting down, and then the deaf was raising his hand quite, he wasn't sure if he should have been raising his hand or if should have been standing, because he was looking at everyone else, and I and six other ladies were there supposedly. It was, the training was also for us, but then it was also the same week that Sir Bai and Sir June wanted to teach us, or to give us a little training on voicing, and we were only learning that skill there. So I wasn't very confident about how I would voice him, because I could see that he was very emotional, and I might not be able to pick up what he was going to say. And Sir June checking on the deaf, whom he was only supposed to watch Sir Bai and wait for his turn, but he was checking on the deaf present, and then he was the one who told the deaf to, okay, you can say what you want, and the deaf would even said na, should I, because the interpreter on deck is interpreting for the speaker, like, is it the right thing to do? And then when Sir June said it, I empathized with the deaf. I felt liberated to be allowed to say what I wanted to say. it was a very big moment for me, and I don't think I would ever want to forget that, really. And I always share this experience also when I talk with or interpreters, or people who want to learn about interpreting, and even to my fellow interpreters. I always bring this memory back because it's nice to be reminded of these things. So sometimes you forget, sometimes we get caught up in an assignment, or in a situation, and when we don't notice this moments of power dynamics, and we sometimes forget that we're taking over, and we're not really giving we're not balancing the power across all the stakeholders in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And as a team interpreter, we share the power. If I'm going on an assignment with a co-interpreter, I used to be, back in my younger days and very naive, would think that the interpreter was there for 20 minutes. I could go and go get some water. I could go listen to some music. I could go dancing, as long as I was back when it was time for me to switch. And again, my peer, cautioned me that we're not really off. You never know when I may need you to switch with me. I may be interpreting, and all of a sudden I get a serious pain in my abdomen. I don't know where this came from. I may have to get up and leave. One situation, again, about the power dynamics, and I'm looking forward to it. I know you are too, about these accomplished deaf people who will be presidents of universities or department heads, and you're really going to do that heavy lifting interpreting, because that person is hiring people and firing people and giving evaluations, and they're making decisions. We have that now. And there was a class in which that person was not a member of the students. They were a resource. They were a resource specialist. And so the teacher would often defer to them for added information on the content of this subject. And this was high level stuff with statistics and numbers and measurements. And me and my co-interpreter were going fine for a while. And the person one of the members of the class had a scenario that they wanted an answer to, that they thought was special and unique based on what they've been learning for the past 2 or 3 days. And the deaf person was explaining how you can adapt and modify this particular information to address your particular situation. The deaf person the hearing interpreter was trying to voice for them and also sign for the person speaking, and there was this disconnect. And it was so severe that the deaf person slammed their hand on the table and got my attention, because I had already zoned out. I was on my phone playing backgammon. I should not have been doing that. And I looked up and just said, I cannot understand this interpreter. I really need you to switch right now. Well, here I was not following the conversation. I don't know the context of the information. I don't know where this interpreter left off. That person is upset and angry, and my co-interpreter is extremely embarrassed because the way that they interrupted this whole dynamic. And they left out the room red-faced and in tears. I had to get into the chair, the interpreter, go back and say, well, what are we talking about again? Okay, what's the question? What's the context? Oh, okay. And then the person, we got through it, and the teacher who was leading the class said, okay, I think this is a good time to take a break. And I saw my co-interpreter outside the room just trying to get to the bathroom so that they could regather themselves. And I was, for a moment, thinking, oh, wow, that interpreter really wasn't the right person for the job. Until a peer interpreter came to me and said, you made the mistake. So what do you mean? You should have been there. You should have been there for your co-interpreter. So you zoned out, and you could have been in, and you could have transitioned, you could have fed them, you could have helped mitigate the situation. And I realized at that point that I gave away my power to be a part of the process. I should have been involved. So it's so many layers to this power dynamic that we think it's just, I'm taking over the deaf people's role and I'm going to make decisions for them, and it's all going to be great for them when they finish the job, and I'm going to be the hero. Oh, no, it's more than that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some deaf people, some, not all, but they have a perception that because they can sign all day, that an interpreter, because it's just signing, it's easy,
Right?
right?
And
So what happens to me in certain situations is like I go to a deaf event or a event rather, and I'm usually the only hearing person that the deaf people know, and they ask me to interpret for them, right? And here I am. I didn't prepare. I didn't prepare myself to interpret, because when you interpret, you have to be present and have to understand what these dynamics are, what's happening in terms of these dynamics, right? It's not just you're just on stage and then you go. It's some people have that automatic response. Okay, let's do this. But for me, it entails a lot of mental preparation. Like I have to get into that zone of, okay, I'm going to be interpreting. I'm not going to be Bay. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to interject who I am, kind of thing. So it takes a little bit, and it's good to also, when we were talking about team, we have a partner interpreter, but also involve that deaf person in that team,
yeah,
right? So
Right.
if we're in a situation where we have deaf people that want to make a comment, then establish that setup with your interpreter where, okay, while I'm up here, you can be all the voicing, and then we'll keep switching that way. Or I'm the 100% interpreter, so I'll take on all the signing and all the voicing when it's my turn, and vice versa, so that you can support. So you have to have that conversation first to make sure that the interpreter is prepared, the deaf person's prepared, the speaker, so we all are on the same page in terms of what's expected of us.
yeah, that's so
Yeah.
true. The division of the work, the task, playing to the stresses of what we're doing when we're interpreting. Because if I'm receiving auditorily information and trying to process it in sign language, and then that person says something, I have to really configure my brain. I almost feel like I need to go in there and just twist it, just so that I can click it to deaf mode and then twist it back to hearing mode. And if we can take that into consideration in the division, then my power in being able to be effective in one genre is enhanced because I've shared the power. I think some people say that teamwork makes the dream work. It is that shared power is shared accomplishments, it's shared achievement. If I take on everything myself, then everything is on myself. You carry everything on yourself. But if I'm able to diversify and share, then it is a matter of we win together or we fail together, but we are together.
Yeah, exactly. And just a caveat is I don't want it to be breaking of work where you you take all the signing and I'll take all the voicing.
No,
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
no. Because you'll be wind up only doing 2 seconds of voicing and 35 hours of signing.
But you know what? There are interpreters
Yeah.
out there that are so willing to do that as long as they don't voice. They're willing to take hours of signing
Exactly.
just as long as the fear of voicing is not there.
Yeah.
Mm.
When I get into assignments, my co-interpreter said, "How do you want to split? You want to split every 30 minutes?" I say, "Well, I'll do 5 and you do 15, and we'll just keep it going like that. It's 5 minutes for you, 15 minutes for me. That's not right." And I say, that joke never works for anybody. So, but it's even that the scenario in which I let my interpreter down, I should have been, even though I did not have to be physically involved, I should have been mentally involved.
Yeah.
And I think none of us can afford to not be involved mentally until the job is done and we go home. Now, physically, you may have that 20-minute break, whether it's voicing or not. But I learned from that scenario that I cannot check out from, that assignment, even if it's that time when I switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're paid by the hour, right? So we might as well be present for the entire hour.
Yeah, it is that being paid by the hour thing.
Yeah. Well, we want to complete this. This is a great discussion. We can talk to you all day. We want to kind of leave this on a positive note to our viewers. especially to those who don't have much support where they're living because they're either remote or they're the only interpreter in their city. So what can we do to raise this awareness, or how can we support them in other ways apart from contacting Pinasli and finding various trainings? But what else can we do? I know that for example, like allyship, it's always looking out. What do we do? What are the resources out there? But what can we do internally? Like how can we look inside ourselves in terms of managing and dealing with power dynamics?
Well, I think we talked about earlier. You asked me what was my role model, my actor role model, and I said Sidney Poitier because he always exuded a high level of dignity in every acting role that he had, and in confronting people who wanted to disregard him, he was forceful, and at the same time, he was politically, PC in the context that he didn't exude his presence to bring you down. He wanted to lift the situation up. It does come down to finding that muse, that type of personality that brings out the best of collaboration, of equity, of of, um, of continuity, and if it's a fictional individual or a real person, it depends on who it is. It could be someone your own family, or maybe a stage in the family. You see two children who sit in a sandbox and they play perfectly well together without any differences between how old they are, or who's in the older grade. The goal is to play together and have fun. And so internally is looking for that one inspiration. If you're religious, you realize that Christ divided his task among 12 disciples and even more beyond those. He didn't do everything himself. He gave them power to go out and do it. And
Right.
it's identified that, well, you sent your disciples out here to do this, so they weren't that great. And he realized he needed to bring them back and give them more training, but he also sent them out again. Um, so if it's in that vein, or it could be Nelson Mandela, who upon 27, 28 years of incarceration came back and said, we will build our nation collaboratively together, even with those who oppressed us. And because to burn this country down in a riot or to oppress those who oppressed us is not going to move us to the next level of survival, which was the big picture. How do we survive together? And so there are people like that in movies or what have you that you can say, I relate because I have a visual context, I have an image, but the character that they exude is what I want to grow to aspire. I know it's in the embodiment of with Sidney Poitier, but what was it about him and his character and the roles he played and the scenarios he was in that I can draw from? Standing and having a sense of humor, not taking yourself too seriously, all of these various attributes.
Yeah, and that's why, sir, you are the Sidney Poitier of interpreting. Ta 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 ta. Hugot!
I'm going to use that.
Because you're so poignant. That's why.
I'm going to use that. I think you've introduced it, and I'm going to carry it forward.
Oh, that's good. And yeah, it takes a community, it takes a village, but it's also, there's a self-reflection type quality that we also need as interpreters, right? We need to give voice to our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do give voice to ourselves, then that's when we can give voice to others.
Yeah.
Others.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
So, Miss Ishat, what do you think? What did you learn today?
I think well, it's like what I've been saying all throughout this conversation. What's really nice is that we get to bring this out into our consciousness, and from the little things to big things, I have a lot of experience of or witnessing, or me personally being in that situation where sometimes I take the power all to myself, and sometimes I just forget that there are other people in the room. It's really good to know these things, because coming from from where I come from, we didn't have these concepts. We don't have like a training. We didn't have lectures about interpreting concepts wise. We didn't have a training on skills. So these I learned. I would say that probably my first experiences of power dynamics between the deaf and the interpreter came from the deaf themselves when they would assert themselves in the situation, and that's for me that's very helpful. And I
Mm.
got that experience because I had a very good relationship with the deaf. I think they would agree. I hope they would agree that I have a good relationship with them. But because I was just thinking that if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have learned these things. And I think that's why I wouldn't say I've been interpreting for this many years, but I was 15 when I started out volunteering for the deaf, and it's been 18 years. You do the math, how old I am. It's been 18 years, and I would say that what really, without the training, without this because Pinasli, I reached out to Pinasli like I think about 2 3 years ago, but the 15 years before that, a lot of the things that I learned in interpreting, I learned from the deaf.
Mhm.
And then a lot of the things that I bring with me in terms of how to deal with the deaf as an interpreter, or mostly as a volunteer, but mainly as an interpreter, I learned from them because they're the ones who are teaching me these things. But without that foundation, I would never have learned these things. I would never learn to respect their culture. I would never learn to respect their identity. And just recently, I was there's an organization here that reached out to Pinasli, and Miss Nati forwarded the request to me because they wanted to have an FSL training for their organization. And this was some I think this also touches on the issues of allyship. When we were discussing with this organization about a part of the initial meeting was the cost, the fees for the lecturer, the fees for the interpreter, and I didn't shy away from that topic because I knew that the deaf had these things had to be discussed in that meeting. And then when then they saw that we couldn't meet their budget, or they wanted to give the training for free, but
Mhm.
they were getting interpreters, they were getting a deaf lecturer, and the deaf leader is empowered and established. So when they tried to look at the budget, they said that it would cost us a lot if we get three persons, like two interpreters and a deaf lecturer. So can we just get you instead? That's me. So
Mhm.
I had to say, I can't do that. I can't do that because we have a deaf person, and this deaf person is the only credible person to give you the training that you want. So we had to negotiate, but we didn't like outright reject or refuse their request. But we had to communicate, and I think that's important also in terms of um uh informing them or educating them about the role of the deaf in situations like this. So I will also apologize to them because I think we didn't give them the enough information as to why
Mhm.
it is important to bring the deaf into to the in the conversation. So when they did when I was able to inform them of that, they they um they were very happy, and they said decisions are made it's easier to make decisions when we are informed about these things. So we understand that. I also took the it was also my bad for for not enlightening them about the cultural stuff, about the deaf being very serious about their identity and their language. But when they were finally informed about that, they were able to make that decision that would benefit them and the deaf and the community and the interpreters as well. So I think it's important to just communicate these things, and it's the same with anything about power dynamics. It's important to communicate. I think it's the same with all relationships, whether the
Mhm.
deaf or the hearing or with anyone else. It's just important to communicate, and I think that's how we share that power and how we balance it.
Yeah.
Really, so I think that's my biggest takeaway from this episode.
Yeah. That's the key. Communication. Sir Jeff, any final thoughts?
I think I love the way you were ending the fact that it's a power dynamic in all aspects of life. You know, it's one of the, I think the biggest issue with some people is the powerlessness. They feel like they're powerless in dynamics. And when you can position yourself either by influence or by power or by authority, that you do have a say. So you have a ability to make a decision. You can be a part of the process. Then you're elevating them to another level of participation. I was thinking about your two sons, Bay and my son, and each step of the growth. It was always a matter of you're getting more opportunities, and there's a power dynamic about it. And I'm going to yield it to you as you have come to be able to recognize it and you're aware of it. But it's also easily given, easily taken away. And one of the things about the power dynamic is that you're very charitable about it as opposed to hoarding it. Sometimes you can be so dynamic or bombastic about it, so egotistical about it, I should say, that the power that you used to have is now no longer there. You don't have the trust. You don't have the confidence. People don't have any trust in you. They have no confidence in you. They are very suspicious of where you're coming from. And all because of the way you manage the power dynamic. Or it could be the opposite, and you go, wow, I really have the highest regard for who you are. I trust you completely. I have every confidence that we're going to get through this assignment together because I've seen how you use your power and your influence.
Yeah. And that's the great takeaway. We're going to do this together. So thank you, Sir Jeff, for all your words of wisdom, your hugots, everything that who you are. Thank you for joining us and being always a support to the Filipino deaf community. Please stay on the line. We'll do a picture afterwards. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I did. The only thing I missed was not doing it there. I mean, I just missed Manila.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I was saying, I keep thinking every time I watch maybe, I think one of the Jason Bourne movies or some other movies, I say, that's Manila, that's Philippines. Be there. Look. So I really, I really just have such an amazing relationship. My second country. I understand they cleaned up Manila Bay. I heard they put a beach there. They tried. They tried.
Yeah.
I think they're trying. They tried. So, I think someone mentioned going to Robinson's Mall. I remember, all of my weekends when Natty wasn't working me to death. Just teasing. I could go to the mall and go to the movies. And it was, just I'm probably sure that in my former life I was Filipino.
Yeah. Well,
when this pandemic
again,
is over, come visit downtown,
yes.
and we'll feast on mangoes, mango everything.
Oh, you have no idea. I have mango chapstick. I have mango. Everything is mango for me. Ice cream, everything. If I see mango on it, I want to see what it's about. I
think you were Filipino in your past life. I would say that too.
I think I ate so much mango that the palms of my hands started turning orange.
Yeah.
I was very spoiled. One thing I know, I have not lived. I don't know, if you had, I don't know if it's an initiation or something you have to do. I'm not going to do it. That's balut. I'm not doing it. Have you?
But that would not make you Filipino anymore if you don't eat balut.
Yeah.
Okay,
and we'll do something like mango flavored balut for you.
I don't think so.
We love you that much.
Yeah. So thank you, Sir Jeff. Please stay safe.
I will.
Again, thank you for everything that you've shared with us, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Wear a mask. Wow, Miss Isha, that was such a great episode.
Yeah, it was. Parang
so
Zoom breakout session ulit. Nag-training ba tayo?
Galing.
Yeah. Miss Bebe, hindi pa tayo tapos mag-interpret.
We're still live.
We're still live. Miss Bebe, we're still live. Okay, we still have to thank our viewers, thank our tech team.
Yes.
For all that you have done. We will also put up the website for those who are interested in joining Pinasli. If you want to be a member, we're very open and welcome wherever you live in the Philippines. We want to be able to support you, provide you professional development if needed. Here is our Pinasli website. We are at www.pinasli.org. Send us a message, and you can be an active member if you are a working interpreter. You can be a student member, and also an ally. We also have institutional corporate membership. So if you or your association or organization wants to be affiliated with Pinasli, please let us know. We'll give you the details once you send us a message. And of course, our show is not for free. It does cost to put up all this tech stuff. And if you want to donate, you're more than welcome to donate at our BPI savings account. Here's our account information. And if you want more information about who we are, what we do, how you can help or be involved in TerpTalks, if you're from Mindanao or from Visayas, anywhere in the region, and you want to know how to start a TerpTalks in your locality, please let us know. We're more than willing to support you in that regard. So, Miss Ishat, any final words on your part?
Connect with the deaf community, find interpreters in your locality, make friends with all of us. We are here to help, and we're here to support you.
Yes, and I also want to thank our sign language interpreters today. We had
Yes,
Sir Lester, Miss Febe, and Miss Nati. They worked
Natty.
really hard. I know it's not easy to talk about this kind of abstract stuff, but we really appreciate you and all the work that you do. Thank you so much.
And also to our tech team, Sir Adrian, at the backstage, managing everything.
I
Thank
think
you so much.
Miss Amy's here
And
too.
Miss
Thank you so
Amy.
much.
Miss Amy
Yes.
also.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you next week. Episode 3. Bye-bye.